Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is, wherever you in the world, it is your Lore Saviour with the very first Cyberpunk book review on the Lore by Night channel. Now don't run away if you are a regular of the Lore by Night channel and brand. There are supernatural creatures found within this tome, so it's not totally off-brand, although there's one very specific supernatural that we're going to be looking at today: vampires. For the most part. And the book in question is Night's Edge, an alternate reality sourcebook for Cyberpunk. And this is, of course, the Cyberpunk setting created by Aurtakis Games. The book was created primarily with use for Cyberpunk 2020 or Cyberpunk 2020 if you're hip and cool, unlike myself. You can also fiddle around with it to make it work with the first edition. You can also make it work with Cyberpunk RED, which is the most recent edition as of the recording of this, the 2nd of June 2025 in the year of our Lord Telos. And of course, if you can make it work with that, you can make it work with the Cyberpunk Edgerunners mission kit, which uses said rule set. Now, before I get any further with this gorgeous tome, I'm going to have to clear up some confusion, because when I posted this online, there was a lot of people that were asking about this, and I just feel it's important to clear up this difference. When I was getting into Cyberpunk, I was vaguely aware of a setting within the World of Darkness that combined the World of Darkness with the Cyberpunk setting. This book is not it. This is a separate entity entirely. What you're thinking of is the World of Future Darkness, which is actually something I covered about a year ago on the channel, and a playlist is going to appear in the corner. I think it's over there somewhere now. So go and check out those videos where we actually have a look at the World of Future Darkness, which are available in 3 different installments found within the OG White Wolf magazines. I'm also going to include said magazines in the description below for you to purchase as PDF copies, and if you can find hard copies online, do grab those, but you'll find PDF copies on DriveThruRPG in the description below. Now, Night's Edge puts vampires, werewolves, and vampire hunters, and werewolf hunters I guess, within the cyberpunk setting. It is not the World of Darkness into the cyberpunk setting, so if that's what you're looking for, go and check out the playlist I mentioned a moment ago. Otherwise, stick around and we can find out how exactly vampires and werewolves work within the cyberpunk setting in Night's Edge. So this gorgeous book has about 95 pages, all black and white art, and despite what I was going on a moment ago saying that how it is not a World of Darkness supplement, it is very clearly influenced by the art style of early White Wolf books. And at this point, it was only first edition. Second edition might have come out at this point. Some nerd can correct me in the comments below. And the confusion isn't helped also because about a year later, in 1993, the World of Future Darkness ideas would come in those White Wolf magazines that I mentioned already. So look at that, I'm talking about the World of Future Darkness a year ago, and now I'm talking about this a year later. What a strange coincidence that turned out to be. Anyway, regarding this book in question, it is very clearly influenced by the World of Darkness, because you could very easily lift any of the images found in here, you could put them in the World of Future Darkness stuff, and you can also put them in earlier World of Darkness stuff, and I don't think a lot of people would really notice that you've just suddenly put like cyberpunk influenced vampires within the cyberpunk setting, and there's some huge differences between them as well. Whereas the World of Future Darkness has rules and ideas of making cybernetics and all that tech stuff work within vampires, this for the most part doesn't. In fact, the older your vampire is, you can't use like cyber gear stuff at all, and there's a specific word for that I can't actually remember. When I refer to my amazing A4 page of notes, I may be reminded of that later on, but you get what I mean. Like, you can't have like cyber arms, like rocket launchers, all the shit of it as a vampire. But yeah, the book's art style is mostly black and white, and as I said, it's definitely inspired by the OG first, second edition stuff of Vampire the Masquerade. It's very easy to read through, even though you have like square, rectangular, grey sidebar stuff. The text is easy to read upon that, and that's talking about the sidebar stuff. The author has to make the point of distinguishing, if you see things in this type of sidebar, it means it's going to be some like in-game fiction, and this other type of sidebar is going to be like practical use of the mechanics, which I think is a weird inclusion. I don't know how common practice this sort of thing was in like the early 90s. But it's very clear wanting to cater to the cyberpunk audience who may not be aware of that, which is a weird thing because that sort of stuff is present in Cyberpunk 2020, but it's something that's very clearly influenced by the early White Wolf stuff, because you would find these sidebars in some of the source books where you would have in-game discussions with like a character somebody else, or one character's like lecturing to the reader sort of thing. You know the sort of things I'm talking about if you've seen any White Wolf / World of Darkness book. But I kind of appreciate the little quirk all the same, just a little glance into the history of the tabletop genre. Another weird quirk with this book is that if you go to the back of the book, you'll find a character sheet which you could put into a photocopier and copy and paste. It looks something a little bit like that, and you've got the index as well. But on the very back page, you have the errata. So the version I have is a second printing. Also, another weird thing, my spine is printed upside down. I mean, the spine of the book. I hope my actual spine isn't printed upside down, but given my back issues and my knee issues, I would not be surprised if God went, fuck this cunt, put the spine upside down. I'm getting a bit off topic here, but let's go back to the errata. Like, again, another weird quirk, because I think a lot of people are going to be playing the rules and not necessarily remember that you have an errata in the very back page of the book, which you're not going to be looking at all that much. Again, you could copy and paste that and just slap that on the table, or if you're doing things online these days, you could like have that as a PDF up there, but it's a weird thing to include that because it might cause a bit of confusion. That why didn't you just reprint this with all the rules in there and like just mention like in the front page, like along with all like the publication date stuff and all the rest of it, and just say that, oh, this is a second printing here, they changed errata there. So the very first chapter of the book, well, calling it a chapter is a bit of a stretch because it's only like 3/4 of a page, because most of it's taken up by artwork and sidebars. And if I wasn't clear earlier on, the artwork in this book is fucking gorgeous. Yeah, it takes a lot of influence from those early Vampire the Masquerade stuff, but it's really nicely done, and actually I prefer the artwork done in Night's Edge than in the World of Future Darkness stuff, but that's just a personal preference thing. It definitely captures the more gothic nature of Vampire more, which is interesting given the fact it's a cyberpunk setting piece, but I kind of like that, and it sort of touches upon that a few more points in this book, but we'll get onto that when we get onto it. So the introductory 3/4 a page tells what it aims to cover and what you'll find inside, and it describes that it's mostly collected information, info that's been collected by Baron von Kronos, who's been a vampire since the 10th century, which I kind of like. It's got that weird little quirky bit, which is also where the book explains what the different sidebars mean that I waffled about a moment ago. It sort of presents Night's Edge as like this how-to-do guide, like, here you go, vampire, here are all my notes, go and do that, and then go and, fucking survive. It's a nice little quirk, and it's sort of very 90s cheese, which I can only say now, looking back, as a modern day as of the 2nd of June 2025, in the year of our Lord Talos. But it's a cool little thing, rather than just sort of launching into it and doing things in the first person. Although, sticking to the more gothic nature of things, it would have been interesting if the vampire writer was left anonymous, or it was left like a little key at the end of all this writing, but that's just how I would do things differently, and it's what's presented here works well all the same. Then we move on to the first chapter, and you'd expect that with this information about, oh, here's this ancient-ass vampire talking about vampires in this big old book for you to read, you'd expect that we would start with vampires, but no, it actually starts with vampire hunters, which I suppose is an interesting choice if you're teaching new people that they're people who are aware that you exist. These are the sorts of people you've got to look out for. But on a more practical level, as somebody who's going to be like purchasing this book to play vampires, where you literally have the queue on the top, in a dark future only vampires own the Night's Edge, which, by the way, just talking about the artwork on the front cover, just to distract myself for a moment, I fucking love this. It's dark, it's gritty, it's very much a weird blend between the Gothic World of Darkness stuff and the Cyberpunk stuff, but that, I can't point, that just looks a bit fucking shit, to be honest. On the back cover, it's pretty straightforward as well. Bit vague and mysterious, with this sort of like silhouetted figure there, which is very clearly the vampire. It's simple, it does the job. You've got this book, you can clearly see it's about vampires in Cyberpunk, and the first chapter you're going to see is all about vampire hunters. Bit of a weird choice there. I could see a lot of people just like, okay, where's the shot on the vampires? Where's the shot on the vampires? Ah, there we are, let's start reading. And not necessarily know stuff on the vampire hunters, which actually is a very interesting chapter. It would have been served better if it was a bit further back, personally. So the chapter itself starts talking about the lore of vampires, and quite frankly, it's a whole load of nothing, because they don't really know, and as you'll soon learn later in the book and this review, the vampires don't really know much either. But there's a lot of talk, making sure you've got your stakes, your holy waters, your crosses, and all the rest of it, even though it acknowledges That's not something that will affect every single vampire. It does talk about later on in the book, like, as an example, you may have some vampires who may not be able to enter churches, not because of, like, anything, like an external factor per se. It's their own faith that's being tested. They may be a really religious person in life, but now they are a walking form of sin. They may feel like ashamed themselves to enter this holy site, which is a very interesting twist on true faith, if we're again making that World of Darkness comparison, because it's very much inspired by VTM, whereas somebody's true faith will allow them to exercise an individual, whether it's with the aid of an item, or there are some individuals whose faith is so paramount that just the existence of them makes the vampire, whatever, like, make them appear as like some angelic angel that just like shuns everything out of existence. If you know who I'm referring to there, you're a truly based individual and have been studying your World of Darkness lore. You have a lexicon of terms that hunters use to describe other hunters, groups which we'll talk about in the moment, but also vampires themselves. So for example, funny enough, you have a prince, the leader of a vampire's coven, or the vampire who creates other vampires. Again, another Vampire the Masquerade link there. But a lot of these are actually chess-based terminologies, which, again, making connections to Vampire the Masquerade, the Great Jihad, the Battle of the Elders, like sparring off cities of vampires against each other, is often described as a big old chess game. And the symbols that would be used, I believe, 2nd edition, possibly revised, will describe the different generations, or the titles like Ancilla, Methuselah, Elder, as different chess pieces, each one being stronger than the last. The influence is all over this book. Like, another terminology you'll find is kissed, infected with vampirism, bitten by a vampire, etc. Again, the kiss is the draining of a mortal to the feed upon them. Again, influences all over the place. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time I'm mentioning this. I say that because, you know, we're dealing with a page of notes here, and I'm sort of like riffing upon this. I don't know if that's coming across, really. But one of the really cool things about the chapter is that pretty early on it gives you like a quick primer about hunting vampires, what to watch out for, when to retreat, how to keep your base safe, like little things like that, which is actually a really useful thing if you're playing any game that deals with like hunters fighting monsters. Sure, there are games dedicated to that, they'll go into a lot more information about it. But again, from the perspective of a mortal, like giving a quick primer to somebody, like, it's all about survival, like quick thinking on your feet sort of thing, and if you can't get the basics down, then everything else is just a complete waste of fucking time. So I like it that that's included in there, because it makes it feel more believable that it's like one person talking to another, like you're being taught like on the first, like learning on the job sort of thing. That's the phrase I was looking for. And then it talks about some factions of vampire hunters, and there's a little info on all of them. There isn't like, you won't find like pages and pages of lore, you won't find like special logos or powers for them like you would find, again, the World of Darkness. So to go through the organisations proper, the first one that's presented is the largest and the most organised, which are the Sun Knights, who can be found all across the world, but mostly in the US of A. And it was set up by some rich guy whose daughter had been turned into a vampire, and now has sort of this personal vendetta against vampires. This is sort of the most corpo-based one, and the one that I feel that could serve as the biggest antagonist for both vampires and vampire hunters. Like you're in a small little group trying to do something, and you've got this big old corpo who are being hired out by people to take out vampires. It makes a very interesting little inclusion to include that one first, personally. You also have Heartburn, which in my note I have described as a weird group of piss-take cultists, especially when you have their actual name, which is presented later on in that particular section of their description, which is literally the Transylvanian Correspondence School of Vampire Hunting. Like, they sit you down in classrooms with like videotapes or whatever the equivalent that would be, and teach you about vampire hunting. It feels like a scam artist sort of thing. Like, they are not really well prepared, and obviously they are the least organised, which again could serve as a very interesting antagonistic thing, like this weird group of wannabe vampire hunters who are just getting in the way and just like fucking shit up. It would be interesting to see like a group of players being a part of this. Maybe they're part of a family that's been brought into this and they have to try and flee, and then the cyberpunk game setting plays out proper. But the final group is probably the most interesting to me, which are the Inquisitors, who target cybervamps. which are cyberpsychosis individuals who pretend or act like they're vampires. So they don't actually hunt vampires. They hunt people who act like it through cyberpsychosis. And it describes a lot more about cybervamps, which is a very interesting little section of the book and puts a very interesting spin on it. And another interesting thing about the Inquisitors is that they are the only ones that are based exclusively in Night City, which again touches upon some really interesting things in the cyberpunk Night City lore, where cyberpsychosis is something that's very rampant there. It kind of suggests in more than one instance that cyberpsychosis is primarily a Night City issue, or at least that's just my interpretation of things. The Inquisitors are also really interesting because they don't actually have any like cybernetic stuff. They are just like purely flesh hunters, which might not surprise you given their focus on hunting like cyberpsychosis individuals. But even so, there are organizations and groups within Night City who are up to their fucking teeth in like cyber gear that hunt, you know, cyberpsychosis individuals. But you can go and read any Cyberpunk book or play Cyberpunk 2077 to learn more about that. The chapter also has new equipment. It has like a 1d10 motivation for hunting vampires, which is similar to the life path stuff you'll find when you're creating your character for Cyberpunk, which sort of makes it a lot more believable, and it puts the character in the story rather than just like a bland vampire hunter with like a load of weapons and stuff, which I really like because it sort of makes it stick out a little bit more, which again also links a bit more into the World of Darkness and Influence. You create a person rather than just a stat block. But then again, Aurtakis Games' Cyberpunk game came out much before Vampire the Masquerade did, so is Vampire the Masquerade a rip-off of Cyberpunk at this point? There's also a very interesting like 1d10, I think it's a 1d10 anyway, like found prey table, which is like a great kickstart for a quest or any sort of mission for vampire hunters, but with a bit of tweaking you could also use that for how your vampire character would be embraced. Not just for Night's Edge, but you could also use it for the World of Future Darkness, but you could also use it like regular Vampire the Masquerade games as well. But as I said, it would just need a bit of tweaking just to make it work, specifically with the modern goth punk setting era shit. You also have information on using cybernetic stuff, which is the word I've been missing all the way through this, for vampire hunters, unless you're an Inquisitor, because you don't use it, of course, which is nice that it's made that distinction because it's going to be different from just your usual group of cyberpunks who are going out like getting money. This has a very different spin on things. It becomes a lot more dark and twisted because it's a lot more goal orientated, because you're rather than just going from mission to mission to mission, you are hunting vampires. Like, that is the goal of your vampire hunters. So the Cyberpunk game is going to have a very different twist on things. Although I imagine there's going to be some people who are going to reach out to your groups and like suspect that they're like aunt, cousin's niece's mountain chicken is suspected to have vampirism. So I suppose it just puts a different spin on things, I guess. But it's nice that stuff is covered all the same. There's also a new game called Dracula's Children, who pretend and act like they're vampires, which is very different and not to be confused with the Villainic vampires, which I'm only mentioning because there is a huge difference between the two. What are they? You're just going to have to read that up in Night's Edge and find out for yourself. The second chapter of the book is on vampires themselves, and from the get-go, it encourages players not to be vampires, which I find a little frustrating because, again, as I mentioned earlier on, you've got this book about playing vampires in the cyberpunk setting. Why are you telling people not to play vampires, you fucking pillocks? Although it does address it that vampires in the cyberpunk setting are already overpowered, but for fuck's sake, you've made a fucking cyberpunk vampire, but let them be overpowered dickheads. And you can be very overpowered dickheads pretty quickly in default play in Cyberpunk, so encouraging people not to be too powerful in your already OP combat heavy game, I feel is just a little silly, but I do appreciate that all the same, because it kind of stops it becoming a horror game or a horror extension to your action-packed game, because as I keep mentioning, it takes a lot of influence from Vampire the Masquerade, and it is wanting to be a gothic cyberpunk game, and to me, it's clear that they want the hunters to be the focus and you're hunting vampires. And that becomes more frightening because not only do you have to do all the cyberpunk horrors to deal with, but you've now got this added layer of horror to deal with, vampires. But, you know, it's a weird stance to be in, really. Like, you make this book that's focusing on playing vampires but you're not willing to embrace that bit more. It's some very weird mixed messaging here that I both appreciate and find really fucking annoying. So after from the little warning, we learn a little bit about the history and the lore of vampires in this cyberpunk setting, and admittedly, there's not a lot. Like, the whole thing is described with, like, the church and the garlic that I talked about earlier on is talked about more in this chapter. Becoming a vampire is a transfusion of the blood, which again is another VTM reference. There's a bit more maths involved to it, which I'm not particularly fond of, because it puts a scientific element to your supernatural game. Even though it's a cyberpunk thing and I kind of get it, it's just... It's vampires are supernatural, there shouldn't be like a whole science for it unless you're wanting to do a whole, some big tech corpo created vampires and they've gone and escaped sort of thing. Although, there is a discussion, it's even this chapter, it might even be the one before it actually, where you have this scientist that's talking about vampirism as a disease, or people insisting or believing that they are a vampire. It doesn't even talk about vampires evaporating the sun, because I think it's just assumed that people just treat vampires like that. The only thing that's hard set in stone in this is that there are records of vampires existing for over 6,000 years, and that's presented by our vampire narrator, which I actually really like for a couple of reasons. It creates a lot of freedom for your groups to come up with your own ideas. You could go with a whole corpo idea and like have that 6,000 year idea presented as like some sort of conspiracy just to hide up the truth a lot more. But it also really fits the cyberpunk setting. Like, the myth and the history and the legend of vampires are totally irrelevant in the cyberpunk era. What matters is the here and now. Like, the motto of like, live fast, die young, just very much fits the vampire setting a lot more. Even if you're wanting to create like a super ancient vampire, which you can do through its character creation process in this book, which I kind of like that that's up in front and centre. It's not like an alternate play sort of thing, or you can bend and tweak like NPC stats to make it work for you. No, it encourages you from the get-go to make a vampire of a certain age. It's even with as simple as a fucking dice roll. Again, another life path thing. I like the fact that it encourages that level of creativity, and even with your supernatural gothic cyberpunk setting, like, it really does lean into the cyberpunk, like, what's happening here and now is important. It really doesn't fucking matter how vampires came to being, because it doesn't change the fact that you're still being hunted. It just doesn't change the fact that you need to feed. I kind of like that, and even the fact that you have a couple of ancient vampires in the stat blocks, like as templates sort of things to use in your games. Templates, sorry, as in NPC templates, I should say, which I'll get onto in a bit later. It's nice that really none of them care all too that much about the past either. It's all in the here and now. The character creation and stuff present in this chapter actually looks very cool to try, because I'm really fond of the life path system in the cyberpunk, where it encourages you to roll up all your different responses to create like a whole weird combination of characters and fashion styles. Whilst fashion doesn't play too much into the cyberpunk stuff, because it does require you to have Cyberpunk 2020 to do this, there are alterations that have been made to this, so you can play as vampires. It discusses alterations you can make to the life path stuff, and obviously if you're an Asian vampire, some of that may not apply, or you may have to make some huge modifications to make it work very well. But one of the more interesting things in there is a 1d10 trust table to how you interact with the other vampires in your coven, which I'm sort of playing a stuck record here. Is another interesting connection to VTM, because it's kind of like how the Vinculum works with the Sabbat within Vampire the Masquerade. You all have this big blood bond with each other, and you already tend to see how like supernaturally connected, emotional you are with the rest of the vampires in that pack. However, I don't immediately recall what came out first, Night's Edge or the Sabbat Player's Guide, which is, I believe, the first instance of that being a thing. So it would have been interesting to see whether actually the Vampire the Masquerade was influenced by this book or the other way around, but I just think that's a very interesting idea that sort of adds a more bestial nature, far more animalistic, despite clearly vampires having some degree of like sentience to them. It creates a very interesting role-playing dynamic that I can't really recall seeing a lot of in Vampire the Masquerade, which you could argue is because you'd want those sort of interactions to come naturally through roleplay, which I'm in favour for sure, but as the get-go, like rolling on that table to see how much you get on with like a particular member or with the coven as a whole, and then working out why do you hate each other so much, why do you like each other, like, that's very interesting to me, and I think that if you're doing something like that, you should lean into it a lot more. One of the more darker bits in this chapter, and actually as the book as a whole, is the sanity mechanics, where it can lead to a vampire of a particular age level, like wanting to kill themselves or outright offing themselves, because it makes it that the older you are, the more difficult you find it of dealing with your vampirism in this ever-changing fast world. And I find that a very interesting idea and a very interesting way of dealing with fighting with that like vampiric beast inside of you, because again, comparing it to Vampire the Masquerade, the whole humanity thing, it like goes down by numbers, and if it goes down to nothing, you become what's known as a wight, which is basically a mindless monster that just wants to eat and kill things all the time. But with here, no, you don't become a monster. You're already a monster, and it's very clear from that idea and everything else that's happened in the book. It acknowledges that you're a monster. It's just your conflicting human emotions just makes it very difficult for you to fucking deal with, and you may just end up offing yourself if you just find it too difficult to bear. And it requires a lot of work to make that work in a game, I think, or at least just a very simple discussion. It's like, hey, this game's got a sanity mechanic where you may end up killing yourself, and it's definitely not something that's suitable for every group, especially if you're dealing with somebody who has very recently dealt with somebody who has killed themselves, or something else that's happened earlier in life that makes it difficult for them. But it doesn't take too long to work that out with a quick, simple conversation, or ticking that off in your consent sheet, however you want to do it. But I think, in any case, it's a very interesting way of approaching that in a game. Maybe assign it to a mechanic may make it a bit crass, but just the overall conversation regarding mental health and how it's just difficult to cope with things sometimes when you're forced in a situation you can't ever escape from. That, what's the point of it all? Like, for 1992, is something that really should be applauded, no matter how crass you think it may well be delivered. I personally think there's nothing too wrong with how it's presented here. The silent mechanic, maybe, as I said, is a bit crass, but, I'd much rather that a company or group of authors would attempt to do something and it's a bit in poor taste, or it's a bit crass or badly handled, than not trying at all. And again, this is also the 90s, the early 90s of that, and this was practically unheard of, both within the TTRPG sphere and just general conversation as a whole. Interestingly enough, all this character creation stuff would appear in a condensed format in Chapter 4, which I'm not too sure why. I think it's because they just wanted to present the rules as easily as they could to people, so you don't have to start going through page after page after page. You could just have all the tables and all the character creation stuff there. But it's not all that difficult anyway, and you can just open up that particular page in the chapter or put a bookmark in it. I just think it's a weird choice, but I appreciate, again, just going what I was saying a moment ago, they made an effort. It's a bit cap-handed, but an effort was made all the same. But the chapter ends with two really interesting themes. It ends with a world situation, so how vampires are interacting across the world, how vampires interacting in Night City, how they're interacting in the rest of Europe and America, all that stuff. As a games master, I find really interesting, because I tend to run most of my games in England because I'm British in it, and I just like to have that information there when it's available, so I can just tweak and flavour things to my own personal taste and see just how all these different elements work together. And with Cyberpunk, I intentionally bought the Cyberpunk book that's based in Britain, which is going to appear somewhere up there. So when I do run Cyberpunk, I can base things in the UK a lot more and don't feel I have to be constricted to Night City all the time, which is this big old sandbox anyway. But it's nice to have that information there, and it just makes the world feel a bit more believable. And it's also nice to see that vampires isn't just a Night City problem, because unlike the world of Future Darkness, it pretty much made that as a Night City thing, or rather, it really did ham-fist, kind of cack-handedly in my opinion, how vampires have influenced Night City, and I talk a bit more about that in my World of Future Darkness retrospective. But at the very back of that chapter, just after this, it has those templates of characters, those vampire characters. Dracula's there, Bloody Mary is there, and our vampire narrator is there as well, who is much older and far more powerful than Dracula, which I feel is just a little childish. It kind of feels like, now we've got our own vampire, he's bigger, stronger, better than yours, I get it. You have this vampire narrator, you got to put the stats in there. He's been around since the 10th century, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking at that really weirdly, but I presumed he was just going to be a lot older anyway. Having Dracula there just kind of did it for me. If you had him and all the other vampires that you have there, your templates, it wouldn't bother me so much, but it just feels like you're doing the whole one-up thing, we'll show them, we'll make an even better vampire than Dracula, who is often seen as the first fucking vampire anyway. But It's a small little niggle, but it's cool that Dracula's there, because I know that people are going to try and find a way to put Dracula in there anyway. But comparing that to your new and improved, bigger, better Elder Vampire, it's a bit weird to me. The next few chapters I'm just going to skim through because there really isn't a lot for me to talk about here. Chapter 3 is to dealing with psychic powers of your vampire characters, which is very influenced not only by your traditional vampires of old, but some of them do have like a VTM twist to them as well. I kind of like how it handles it here though, because if you haven't played Cyberpunk before, which quite frankly I think a lot of you watching my channel aren't going to be aware of, the way that dice system works is that you roll a d10, and then you add your modifiers and a particular stat together. It's like an attribute and a skill thing. You take that total number, add it to a d10 roll, and then depending on what the difficulty modifier is, determines whether you get a success or not. The powers here work very similar. Like character creation, you have little level indicators for a particular power up to 10. You would have thought, with the connections to VTM it's obviously pulling from, that each level would give like a different power. No, if you're wanting to do a particular thing, it increases the difficulty modifier. So if we take an example from Knight's Edge, I'm going to use one of the telepathy powers, specifically targeting animals, which may or may not be connected to animalism. If the character wanted to detect all animals of a specified type within 100 meters, you would have to match or beat the difficulty challenge rating of 15, which means that you roll your d10, add all the stats, plus any other modifiers would have to match or beat 15. But if you wanted to communicate telepathically with a specified animal, you would have to beat 30, which means that young vampires, who are called fledglings, which is again something that the book mentions, another VTM reference. Then again, this one isn't exclusively VTM. Are not going to be able to do like these really powerful things, but some of the older vampires can, which I think is a bit more realistic way of dealing with that, because with VTM you can only do it if your generation was at a certain level, which meant having put in a certain dot in the background, it meant you could access to the dots above 5 in a particular discipline, whereas this one you are investing and training up those particular skills, so you reach that one through play, you now have access to these powers. It takes quite a bit of work, especially with how experience works in that game, to reach that point. It feels a bit more believable than what VTM does. But then again, Cyberpunk is a different game entirely, and it does focus a lot more on the realism of things when compared to VTM and the other World of Darkness games, which does trivialize things, which isn't to say that VTM is inherently worse for that, it's just a different experience. And of course, as I keep saying, Knight's Edge is not Vampire the Masquerade within the Cyberpunk setting. It's an entirely separate thing, despite the number of times I keep saying it's influenced by VTM. I'm going to skip over chapter 4 because I've covered that already, because that's literally just putting all the rules for character creation and stuff together, which if you're going to put that anywhere, it should have really gone in the back. But the next chapter is chapter 5, which is about werewolves, playing and the lore on werewolves, which honestly feels a very rushed afterthought, because it's a reskinning of the vampires. It's again a transfusion of blood. They act differently because of the full moon. They have a whole lunacy mechanic, which I don't think is as strong as the sanity stuff with vampires. It's nice that it's in there, but it would have been nice if there was a bit more effort and care that was put into it. And quite frankly, this is a book for vampires. It doesn't say vampires and werewolf. There isn't a werewolf on the front cover. Its focus is on vampires. It's just, as I said, it's just a bit of a rushed afterthought, even though on the blurb it does say it contains rules covering mostly vampires, but also their brethren, lycanthropes and werewolves. It really does feel like an afterthought here, and I just wish a bit more care was put into it. It does say on the blurb as well that it's like the first of many books, but I don't know what else that was added by Ianus Games, which I can't help but see as Ianus, because I'm perpetually a 12-year-old kid up here. But who knows, maybe there was a book that focused more on werewolves, but you know, if you're going to put werewolves in there, it would be nice if it could have been a bit bigger, to focus a bit more on how werewolves are different other than full moon, and they may get a bit cray-cray. The final chapter of the book is another short one, but this one actually had a bit more thought and care put into it. It's a series of adventures, all of which are very different. The first one has you play as a solo vampire in a solo choose the adventure sort of thing, where you roll a dice for different results, and it's like, oh, if you got this result, go to this particular event, and so on and so forth, which is a very interesting way of doing that. It like helps you to teach you the powers of being a vampire. The next one is a vampire-led one-shot, and the one after that is a vampire-led campaign, which can either take as the background as a much larger ongoing thing you're doing in your sessions, or it can just be centre stage and you can just do time jumps as and when appropriate. And I like that they included those just to provide a bit of flavour. But why isn't there any for werewolves? And why isn't there anything that's focused on vampire hunters? Yeah, the vampire hunters appear in the actual one-shot in the campaigns, but you have a chapter focusing on vampire hunters, which is fairly lengthy. You've got a tiny little one on werewolves, so why don't you have, like, an adventure that's dedicated to that? And also, the no werewolf template stat blocks here as well. They're going to make some really cool werewolf, like, NPCs as well, but again, it just felt a bit rushed, honestly. Which would in turn make this chapter feel a lot weaker in comparison. So what do I think about the book as a whole? Well, I'm breaking one of my rules here because I haven't actually run this, but as I said, I saw a lot of people getting confused about this, and I just thought it was important to put this video out there. Also, I haven't seen a lot of people online, on YouTube specifically, talking about this book. Like the World of Future Darkness, it comes up in conversation because, it's vampires within the cyberpunk setting, and people tend to get this one confused with the World of Future Darkness and vice versa, so I thought I'd change that. And, I would really like to run this. If that's something that you lot are interested in, just let me know in the comments below and I can try and arrange something someplace somehow. But yeah, this is a really cool thing. It obviously puts most of its attention in the vampires because it's primarily a vampire attachment to the cyberpunk setting. I do recommend you go and pick this up if you can. However, and this is a very big however, if you're going to try and buy a physical copy, you're probably going to be spending quite a bit of money for it, because the lowest I have seen, and it's the version that I'm holding, is about 20 quid, which doesn't sound like a lot, but given the fact that most of them are sitting between the 70 and 90 quid, it's quite a rare tome. So if you want a physical copy, you're either going to have to be really lucky like I was. Like, I was just scrolling through eBay looking for something else, and then this appeared, and my jaw hit the floor. I could not believe that this was as low as it was, especially as there was like 5 or might have been 7 people that was watching. It's like, why aren't you buying this? And I like snapped that up within seconds before I could lose it, and I'm just really happy that I have this. It's in really great nick, but you can't buy it print on demand on Drive-Thru-RPG, which is so frustrating, because if we talk about the quality of the print and the paper here, this is marginally better than your standard Drive-Thru-RPG softcover print on demand affair. So I don't know about the ins and outs why you can't put certain books as print on demand there, because the PDF that's on there is in fairly good nick, although I do have to say I found some like not so legal versions that have a better quality than the official one. I'm not saying you should go and pirate it, but maybe use that as like the base of like building like a print on demand version, because it's a really neat little book and people do get it confused. I think if people were able to access this easier, there would be less confusion about Night's Edge being like the Vampire the Masquerade tack on to the world of to the cyberpunk setting, rather than it being its own unique thing. And I think it does the whole vampire in the cyberpunk setting very well. I imagine that it is a very overpowered thing, given how OP your regular human characters in the cyberpunk setting can be. But yeah, do pick it up if you can. If you're able to find a really cheap copy, like physical copy online, get it, because it's a really neat thing to have. If not, go and grab it on Drive-Thru-RPG. I'm going to provide it in the link for you to purchase, and if you purchase it with that link, alongside the White Wolf magazines I mentioned earlier on, I get some of the money back because I'm an affiliate on Drive-Thru-RPG, and I'm able to provide cool little content things for you like this, whether they're big, small, somewhere in between. Also, you get some cool books out of it as well, and if you've got these books already and want to purchase something else, you can go and grab the affiliate code and post it in the URL of Drive-Thru-RPG, the ST Vault, or any of the other sister sites to that, and I get some money back that way as well, which is pretty awesome poker stuff. So, if for those of you who are new to the Lore by Night brand and the reviews I occasionally do, I do not do out of 10 scores because they're subjectively pointless. Because one person is 10 out of 10 is another's 3 out of 5 stars, which is another's minus 42 out of 100. So, I shall rate Night Edge Mundane Powers out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. So, tell me, what do you think about this book? Have you played Night Edge using the cyberpunk rules? Have you played the World of Future Darkness stuff before? Have you combined both these vampire cyberpunk stuff before? Let me know all things vampire and cyberpunk in the comments below. If you've got any questions, I'll do my absolute best to answer them. I'm not an expert on either. Well, I'm an expert in the World of Darkness, but specifically the World of Future Darkness and Night's Edge. If you have anything to ask about that, do let me know and I'll do my best to answer that. Would you be interested in me running some Night's Edge for you, both as like a group thing or like a solo actual play on the channel, because I do those as well? Would would you be interested in seeing more World of Future Darkness stuff on the channel? I could do some solo stuff. I could run a World of Future Darkness one-shot for you lot. Do let me know, because it's all going to be dependent on how infused you are by this, because it's going to take a lot of time and effort and maybe some money to do all of this properly for you. So there's got to be a lot of buzz from it. You've taken some time out to do this for you. So yeah, let's start a big old friendly conversation about it and have a big old chat about cyberpunk vampire shit and any other sort of supernatural thing as well. Like, have you put werewolves in a cyberpunk setting? Let's just talk about this in the comments below. So if you like this video, give it a cheeky little thumbs up and let me know that you like it and want to see more little things like this. Share this video with any and everyone who would love what I do, and also who needs to be reminded that Night's Edge is not the world of future darkness. And subscribe to the Lore by Night channel, and I'll see you on the next upload, whatever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.